Hi guys, before I start reading, I'd just like to wish everybody that does celebrate Easter a very happy Easter. And for those that don't, I hope you have a wonderful Sunday afternoon. Okay, Chapter 4, Friends and Enemies. Ollie and Gaz had left Chris in the bar shortly before James's arrival. They had been given strict instructions by Chris to cause as much mayhem as possible, but under no circumstances were they to risk being discovered. They took the decision as they neared their destination that it would be a rather good idea to ditch their battered Land Rover and walk the last mile or so towards Glimpton Park. Information was key at this point. Where the patrols were and how often they rotated. How many guards there were. What would be the best placement for devices to cause as much chaos as possible? Where was the best place to conceal the Land Rover? And so on. After spending a few hours scouting the place and fighting their way through the dense undergrowth around the park, they had acquired all the info that they needed. "Mate, I think the crazy Frenchman would be a great pattern to run here," Ollie commented, after they had made their way deeper into the forest surrounding the grounds of the estate. They had long ago become bored with the standard guerrilla tactics, and so had created their own variations, most of which were now named after random cocktails they'd come across. "I'm not sure. I was torn between that and the Mad Mexican, but it's up to you, old chap," Gaz replied with a wry smile. "Ha, that's a good point. The Mad Mexican had completely slipped my mind. Could always do both just to be on the safe side. We wouldn't want to disappoint, now would we? I hate it when things are boring. After all, we really should give them a good show to remember." They both grinned. The excitement on their faces was plainly evident. "Right, well, let's get the landy up here and start setting things up." "Oh, bugger." "What?" "Forgot the champers out of the fridge when we stopped at yours to pick the gear up. Would have been nice to toast the occasion." "Come on, Al. We're not in the OTC anymore. Think those days of officer training at uni are well and truly behind us now." "Still, would have been nice. Knowing you, you'd have brought the caviar as well, I suppose." "Such a dick." "Nah, maybe knickknacks." "Dude, what the fuck? Knickknacks and champagne? Are you for real?" "You really are a strange one," Gaz retorted as he climbed into the landy, still half wondering whether Ollie was being serious or not about the bizarre combination. They drove the last mile and a half up towards the estate, turning off a little way from the entrance, down a dirt track and into the forest. Jumping out, they walked round and climbed up into the canvas-covered rear of the Land Rover. The inside was like an anarchist's dream. There were so many IEDs, claymores, mines, an array of other chemicals to make some more creative devices that the two had designed. "Where did you put the mercury switches, Gaz, old boy?" "Who are you calling old? You're far older than me." "True, and yet still far better looking." "I think they're behind that case of phosphorus grenades. Oh, and be careful. There's some nitro down there somewhere." "What do you think I am? An amateur?" "Well, based on previous comments, the jury's still out on that one." Once they'd finished assembling all of the special deliveries, they carefully stowed them in their Bergens and waited for dark. As soon as the gloom started to descend amongst the trees, they picked their way furtively through the undergrowth towards the grounds of the estate. The moonless night made their task of infiltrating the estate easier. Barely casting a shadow, they moved silently through the grounds, pausing every now and again to allow a patrol to move away from them. They ducked into the dense vegetation a couple of times to allow a searchlight to continue scanning ahead of them. Stealth was a crucial part of this type of work. They moved quickly and had eventually planted 47 devices of varying size and potency in a range of different places, under the top-end cars on the driveway, in the flower beds, against supporting walls of the house, under the mat on the front door, near the gatehouse, and along some of the paths frequented by patrols. To the resident housefly on the wall, the sight of the two grown men's stop-start scurrying, followed by the occasional commando roll across the front lawn, must have been both bizarre and rather entertaining to watch, but would nevertheless pale in comparison to what would follow. The plan in essence was simple: to create as much panic, confusion and disorientation as possible. All of the devices were linked via Wi-Fi to a single iPad, and once activated was sensitive to motion. As soon as the first device was triggered, the control program would take over. It was programmed to randomly detonate a single device at sporadic intervals during the next 2 hours. The boys hoped that this would scatter people in all directions. "Right, guys, I think it's time we retired to some cover and let the fun begin," Ollie whispered. "Sounds like a plan." They cautiously made their way back to the cover of the forest and found a good spot underneath a rhododendron bush from which to watch the fireworks, close enough to the Land Rover should they need to make a quick getaway. "Would you like to do the honours, mate?" Gaz asked Ollie. "You're too kind. On my mark. 3, 2, 1. Active." Ollie counted down and pushed the green button on the iPad. Then they waited. They did not have to wait long. Within minutes a skull and crossbones flashed up on the iPad, indicating that one of the IEDs on a path had been triggered. The screen showed a timer counting down from 30 seconds. As the clock neared 0, Ollie excitedly announced, "Bada bing, bada boom." The sound of the IED exploding ripped through the silence. Trees shuddered and shook from the shockwaves. Lights went on all over the grounds. Guards scattered, diving for cover. As the next 3 or 4 devices exploded, you could make out the cries of pain as the not-so-fortunate expressed their feelings, whilst others were forever silenced, instantly ripped apart by the explosions. The bright purple Lamborghini parked outside the house was sent rocketing up into the night sky, engulfed in scarlet and ochre flames. As it crashed back down to earth, Gaz exclaimed, "Now that's what I call a flaming Lamborghini." They both roared with laughter. Luckily, there was so much commotion around the grounds that nobody heard them. Not wanting to linger for longer than necessary, they decided to disappear. The searchlights had already begun to scan the tree line. It would have been enjoyable to watch the finale, but they both agreed it would not be worth the risk. They knew the final device would not go off for at least another hour, so they departed, still grinning from ear to ear at a job well done. Earlier that day, Lord Anthony Norwood had been sitting behind his study desk at Glimpton Park, listening to 2 of his subordinates attempting to make some feeble excuses as to why they had failed in their task. He was growing increasingly bored and angry with them. Of course, he had expected that there were going to be a few setbacks to his grand scheme, but he had not foreseen incompetence on this scale. It had been such a simple task that even a monkey with half a brain should have been able to carry out the task. All they should have done was to intercept the girl in Middleton, then bring them to him. However, his men had arrived late and made too much noise, which had resulted in spooking the conspirators. Not only that, they'd then lost their trail. "Enough! Both of you are totally incompetent. It was a simple task, which I expected even 2 half-wits such as yourselves to carry out. Obviously I was wrong. Even Mr. Leach here managed to carry out his task and succeeded in burning down Captain Flack's home. It was unfortunate that Flack survived, but at least the fire will have destroyed the documents. As for you two, you're lucky that I'm feeling generous. Otherwise I would have Chamberlain here drag you both outside and put a bullet in both your skulls. Now get out. I don't want to be reminded of your existence," he bellowed at them. A nervous glance passed between the two men at the mention of Chamberlain's name. They were scared of their lord, but they were absolutely terrified of the man known as Chamberlain. The two men hastily made their exit from his office, eager to escape before he changed his mind. "Leech, have you tracked them down yet?" Lord Norwood asked, turning to look at one of the two men still present in his study. "Yes, sir. We located them close to Cateel House. Unfortunately, we were unable to intercept them. The girls spotted one of my guys as she was locking some garages, and they made their escape. We are nevertheless pretty sure we know where they are headed, and we plan to shadow them once they have met up with Flack, sir." "Good. Make sure there are no more failures. I should hate to have to punish failure. Now go and make the necessary arrangements." "Chamberlain, has everything been arranged for the next phase?" he asked, turning his attention to the other man as Leech left the room. "It has, my lord. The shipment is on schedule, and the security around the grounds has been stepped up." "Is that all, my lord?" "No. Make sure those two cretins are taught that failure will not be tolerated in future." A menacing smile appeared across Chamberlain's face as he replied, "With pleasure, my lord. I doubt they will make the same mistake again. Not once I've educated them." Chamberlain left with that smile still on his face. He was already starting to plan what means of education he would dish out to those two incompetent fools. Normally, Chamberlain would have gone straight after the men and cut a finger off each of them. But just at that moment he was not quite in the mood. Besides, he needed to go and finalise the new security plans that he was about to implement in anticipation of the shipment's arrival tomorrow. He still did not know what exactly the shipment contained, only that his master had made it very clear that it was extremely important. Outside, the sky was starting to grow dark as he walked out of the front door and down to the guardhouse on the main gate. He checked that all of the guards were happy with the new rotations, and then decided to go for a brisk walk around some of the grounds to make sure the patrols had taken up their new patterns. Satisfied that all was well, he returned to the house, with the intention of inspecting all of the house's internal sensors. After what seemed like rather a long time, mainly due to having to replace two of the ground floor sensors, he retired for the night. It was going to be a long day tomorrow, and sleep was starting to take over. He would deal with the incompetent pair in the morning, by which time he would have decided upon a suitable punishment. The next thing that Chamberlain was aware of was a tremendous explosion outside. He instinctively awoke and scrambled to get some clothes on. The first explosion was followed shortly afterwards by another. He dressed quickly. What the hell was going on? Racing down the stairs, the front door blew open, and he was blown back across the floor as the door imploded, blown apart by the shockwaves of the Lamborghini outside erupting into the night skyline. His head crashed into the bottom step of the staircase, and he passed out, not to recover for some time. Lord Norwood had also been awoken with the rest of the household at Glimpton by the sudden explosions. He'd reached the top of the stairs moments after Chamberlain had been blown across the hall floor. He could clearly hear the screams outside from some of the guards as chemical flames ravaged them. They were desperately throwing water upon themselves to quench the flames. Unfortunately for them, water had a rather adverse effect when added to phosphorus. Once outside, Norwood took charge of the situation. He organised the remainder of his panicked mob and eventually managed to maintain some air of decorum. After he was sure that there were no more nasty devices to go off, he surveyed the scene. Shattered bricks lay everywhere. The mangled carcasses of his once stunning cars were strewn across the driveway and the now pockmarked croquet lawn. His rage began to grow as he surveyed the scene of devastation. He had a pretty good idea who was responsible for this, and would make sure that they would pay the ultimate price for daring to cross him. Out of the corner of his eye, he spied those two idiots from earlier that day, emerging from a pile of rubble. His rage now boiled over. "You two, here, now!" he roared at the pair. As they raced towards him, he took out a revolver from the back of his trousers. The two men's faces dropped in surprise as he began to raise his arm. They tried to turn and reel away, but it was too late. The two shots echoed around the now silent estate. The bodies of the two men slumped to the floor. It was the last time that they would fail him. He never could suffer fools for long. Chamberlain staggered out from the front door. He was covered in blood. There was a large gash to the side of his head that was oozing blood. He felt pretty dizzy. His ears were still ringing, and he was struggling to focus. He collapsed at his master's feet. Lord Norwood looked down at him, and half thought about putting a third bullet into his head of security, but decided that even as angry as he was, Chamberlain could still be useful. "You," he shouted, pointing to one of the guards, "get this man to the surgeon." As the man rapidly approached Chamberlain's limp body, another guard appeared to help him carry the man's massive figure to the nearest of the three garages, which miraculously had survived the blasts. They took one of the cars that had survived the night's mayhem, and after bundling Chamberlain's limp body onto the back seat, they headed round to the hangars at the back of the house, where the surgeon was busily patching up the injuries of those unfortunate enough to be in the vicinity of the explosions. Lord Norwood spent much of the rest of the night organising his men to reconnect phone lines and to generally set the estate to rights. The bloodied corpses were tossed onto a pile in the centre of the garden at the rear of the house, doused in diesel and set alight. Luckily there was a slight easterly breeze that took the stench of burning flesh away from the house. Daybreak was fast approaching as he finally managed to take 5 minutes for himself, only to be interrupted yet again. This time was the second attempt by the local constabulary to intervene in his affairs. A police superintendent had arrived, most likely to complain about the lack of cooperation shown to his officers the first time they tried to gain an entrance to the estate. "Superintendent, before you get going, as I've already explained to your officers earlier, you have no jurisdiction here, and none of this is of your concern. Do I make myself clear?" "Well, if I just might say," began the super. "No, you may not." Producing a warrant card, he continued on. "I believe this will give you a little more clarity. Now be gone, sir." He could see the super hesitate for a few seconds. Norwood's patience snapped. "Name, number. I shall be having words with your commissioner regarding your behaviour." No need for that, sir. I can see you have everything well in, hand here, sir. We shall be on our way. Sorry for the inconvenience." With a slightly begrudging look over Norwood's shoulder at the devastation behind him, he finished making his apologies and left. By 1100, the first of the shipments on huge articulated lorries had started to roll in through the main gates. They were directed around to the rear of the main house, and from there they proceeded on down a gravel track for approximately 300 yards, entering two large former World War II RAF hangars. Lord Norwood was now in high spirits, The events of the previous night had been exceedingly tiresome and had certainly highlighted weaknesses in his security. Nevertheless, the explosions had been centred around the main house, so the hangars had not been damaged at all. Therefore, the cargo could be moved straight in. He was sure that the explosions had just been a diversionary tactic, although at present he could not ascertain from where attention had been diverted. He had already ensured that security had completed a sweep of the hangars before the trucks started to arrive, just to make sure that no one had left any surprises in the buildings. Ollie and Gaz sat in their Land Rover a few miles away from Glimpton, parked up in a lay-by, watching a monitor. Apart from carrying out the careful placement of the explosives the night before, they'd also placed a few wireless cameras around the grounds, and had taken a special interest in those two huge grass-covered hangars behind the house. Being the best climber out of the two, Ollie had managed to climb up into the metal framework of each hangar to place a couple of small cameras which were well camouflaged against the steel roof. After all, a little bit of extra intel may prove to be most useful in the future. They had toyed with the idea of laying a few mines at the hangar entrances. Unfortunately, due to time constraints, they had decided against this idea. So far, not much had been seen. Most of the night had been taken up with people clearing up after the two chemical experts, and they had witnessed Lord Norwood lose his temper and shoot two men in cold blood. The last half an hour had proved to be a hive of activity, as the first of 8 huge lorries rolled onto the estate and began to unload their covered cargo into the two hangars. Armoured Land Rovers and wooden crates, which definitely appeared to be of military origin, were all carefully unloaded from the lorries. The crates were then organised into different areas of the hangars and neatly stacked according to what they contained. Unfortunately, none were opened, so Ollie and Gaz had no definitive idea as to what was inside. The last 2 trucks left nothing to the imagination as to what their cargo contained. As soon as the tarpaulins covering the flatbed trailers were removed, Ollie let out a gasp. Jesus, they're Comanche attack helicopters. Is he planning on starting an invasion? My whole helicopter knowledge is a little, not great. What exactly are they? Very similar to the Apache, but these things employ stealth technology and can carry a much greater payload. Shit, these guys obviously mean business. Must have some serious moolah behind them to get hold of all this stuff. Yeah, and some friends in very high places. You don't just walk off with one of those helicopters without permission, let alone all the extras that go with them, Ollie replied. Do you think the batteries were included, or were they extra? Gaz sarcastically asked. Twat, I don't think they're worried about that kind of stuff. You always have to be the one to take the joke too far. Well, if I didn't, I know I could count on you to do it for me. Now I wish we had rigged the hangars to blow. Imagine the colours if all that went up. Would have been mind-blowing, man. Would have been cool. Unfortunately, we don't really have the equipment for that now. And somehow I don't think it would be that easy to get back in there again. Better ring Chris and let him know what's going on down here. I'm sure he'll be very interested to find out about this. I wonder what he'll make of it. Hey Chris, how's things at your end? There's been some major developments down here that we thought you should know about. This Norwood bloke has what looks like the start of a mini army down here. There's truckloads of equipment. Just keep coming. Full of stuff. And I mean serious kit. They just dropped off 2 Comanche helicopters fully loaded. Interesting. I thought he was planning something. What do you want us to do? Just keep an eye and keep me informed if anything changes. I suspect he's planning an expedition. Oh, and boys, don't do anything stupid, Chris said before hanging up. Us? Do something stupid. Who does he think we are? Ollie commented after Chris had hung up. I think he knows you better than you think. I suppose we'd better nip off and get some scran, fella. I feel we may be here for quite some time, and I don't know about you, but I'm starving. The cameras are still working, so we can monitor what goes on without actually being here for a bit. If anything happens, we can return pretty quickly. Yeah, I can eat an elephant. Plus, I hate just sitting around doing nothing. At least you're used to it. You never do any work. Speak for yourself, why don't you, Mr. I can't be asked. I'm not the one who could make sleeping an Olympic sport. Ha! You think lying on a beach in the sun tanning is a form of work? I think you need to work on your banter, mate. Please, the extent of your banter is calling someone gay. Oh, I see. That's how it is it? Well, I thought I'd just slip that one in there. Felt it would be rude not to. Mate, love your banter. And with that, they drove off to a local shop. Banter still in full flow.